Some places hold memories so strong you can feel them long after everyone is gone. Ohio has dozens of abandoned sites that tell stories of joy, struggle, and mystery. From silent factories to crumbling schools, each location has its own secrets waiting to be discovered. I've walked through them, and the feeling is unreal. Part awe, part unease. Today, I'll take you through 10 abandoned Ohio places you've likely never even heard of. If you're enjoying this journey through Ohio's abandoned places, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Traveling Guide Hub for more amazing explorations. 1. Ohio State Reformatory, Mansfield. The first time most people see the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, they feel it before they understand it. The building rises slowly out of the ground, stone by stone, like it was never meant to welcome anyone. Even in daylight, the air feels heavy. Many visitors say the same thing quietly to themselves. This place remembers people. You don't just walk through it, you sense the years of fear, hope, and despair embedded in the walls. It's impossible not to imagine the countless lives that passed through those narrow hallways, some broken, some just surviving. The prison opened in 1996 and was built to rehabilitate young offenders. On paper, it was meant to be progressive. In reality, overcrowding, violence, disease, and neglect turned it into something far darker. By the 1930s, thousands of inmates were packed inside cells designed for a few hundred. Tuberculosis spread fast. Beatings were common. Many prisoners died without anyone on the outside ever knowing their names. The prison finally closed in 1990 after a federal court ruled the conditions were cruel and inhumane. Walking through its abandoned halls today, you can almost hear whispers of the past, soft echoes that seem to beg for someone to remember them. One former corrections officer later described his first week working there before it closed. He said the silence at night was the hardest part. Not quiet silence, but a deep stillness broken by random metal sounds that made no sense. Doors would echo when no one was moving. He remembered standing at the end of a long cell block, feeling watched, even though he could see every corner clearly. He told himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling never went away. Sometimes he would hear footsteps in empty hallways or catch shadows moving across his peripheral vision. He learned to respect the building rather than fear it, but the heaviness lingered long after his shift ended. Years later, after the prison was abandoned, a local volunteer helping with preservation shared a similar experience. While walking alone through the east cell block, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sadness. She said it hit her without warning, like grief that wasn't her own. Her chest felt tight, and her eyes filled with tears for no clear reason. She sat down on the cold concrete floor, and later said it felt like the building was telling her something it had been holding for a long time. Even after leaving, she described feeling as if she had carried a small piece of the prison's sorrow with her into the world outside. What makes the Ohio State Reformatory unsettling isn't ghost stories or Hollywood films. It's the real human suffering that happened there. The chipped paint, the rusted bars, the narrow cells, all tell the same story. People lived here. People broke here. People hoped for change here and never got it. Every corner, every locked door, every worn step is a memory of someone who once walked there and left a part of themselves behind. When visitors walk through the empty halls today, many leave quietly. Not scared, not excited, just thoughtful. Because the Ohio State Reformatory doesn't need to invent fear. Its walls already carry it, patiently, the way only real places with real history can. And as you leave, you realize the building has done something subtle. It made you pause, reflect, and for a moment feel the weight of history pressing gently on your shoulders. 2. The Cincinnati Subway. Most people don't know that beneath the streets of Cincinnati lies a forgotten tunnel system that was meant to change the city forever. The Cincinnati subway, as it's called today, was supposed to be a symbol of progress and modern transportation in the early 20th century. But as you walk near its entrances or peer down the dark openings, you feel something strange, a sense of unrealized dreams and silent echoes that never got a chance to speak. The concrete walls and empty tracks carry an invisible weight, a reminder of what could have been. Construction began in 1920, during a time when cities across America were racing to embrace subway systems. Cincinnati's leaders wanted to build a rapid transit network to connect neighborhoods and relieve streetcar congestion. Workers poured their sweat into tunnels and stations, and plans were grand: elegant platforms, tiled walls, and state-of-the-art trains. But the project never finished. The Great Depression hit, funding dried up, and political disagreements left the subway abandoned before it could ever carry a single passenger. The tunnels remained, silent and incomplete, a ghostly monument to ambition stalled by circumstance. Locals who have explored the tunnels describe a strange mix of awe and unease. One urban explorer recalled his first time entering the dark passageways. "It was like stepping into another world," he said. "The air was cold and heavy, and the silence felt like it had been collecting for 100 years. I could hear my footsteps echoing endlessly, and every turn felt like it led deeper into forgotten history." He remembered touching the cracked tiles on the walls and imagining the crowds that would have filled the platforms, a world that never existed. Another visitor, a historian who volunteers to document Cincinnati's abandoned sites, described a moment of unexpected emotion. As she walked through the main tunnel, she suddenly felt a pang of sadness. She realized it wasn't fear, but a deep connection to the people who had poured their labor and hopes into the subway, only to see it abandoned. "It's heartbreaking," she said. "These tunnels were supposed to carry life and progress, but instead they carry echoes of lost dreams." What makes the Cincinnati subway so haunting isn't just the darkness or graffiti-strewn walls. It's the human story behind it, the ambition, effort, and disappointment. The abandoned tunnels remind anyone who ventures there that even the most carefully planned projects can fail, leaving behind only the traces of human determination. Walking through them today, visitors feel history pressing on them in a quiet, almost gentle way. The subway doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you to pause, to imagine, and to feel the weight of a city that once dreamed underground. And when you finally climb back to the streets above, the city feels different. You notice the cars, the buses, the people walking, and for a moment you remember that hidden world below your feet. The Cincinnati subway may never have carried a single passenger, but its story still moves those who take the time to walk its silent corridors, a testament to human ambition frozen in time. 3. Moonville Tunnel, Vinton County. Most people driving through Vinton County, Ohio, have no idea that a dark, forgotten tunnel hides in the woods, carrying with it stories that stretch over a century. Moonville Tunnel, as locals call it, is more than just abandoned railroad infrastructure. It's a place where history, mystery, and human tragedy seem to live together. From the outside, it looks simple. Old stone walls, a dark opening, and overgrown tracks. But anyone who has stepped inside feels a sudden chill, a quiet weight pressing down, as if the tunnel remembers the lives that passed through it. The tunnel was built in 1858 as part of the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad, a line meant to connect remote areas and transport coal and goods across the region. Trains ran for decades, and for most of that time, life and work moved steadily through the area. But over the years, accidents and deaths began to mark the place. One of the most famous stories is that of a young railroad worker who fell asleep on the tracks and was struck by a train. Over time, locals started talking about strange lights inside the tunnel and the sense of being watched. The railroad eventually closed the line, leaving the tunnel abandoned, yet the stories of its dark past remained alive in whispers and memories. Those who explore Moonville Tunnel today often report the same eerie sensations. One urban explorer recounted walking cautiously along the tracks. "The tunnel is silent except for the occasional drip of water," he said. "It's almost like the stone walls absorb sound. I felt an emptiness, but also a strange connection, like I was walking with someone who had been here long before me." He described the cold air hitting him unexpectedly and how the darkness seemed to have its own texture, almost alive. A local historian who volunteers to maintain the surrounding area shared a similar experience. While taking photographs one evening, she suddenly felt an intense sense of sadness, almost as if the tunnel itself were mourning. She explained, "It's not fear in the traditional sense, it's a quiet sorrow. You feel the lives lost here, the people who worked, dreamed, or met tragic ends. And yet there's a strange beauty in that silence." She often returns, not for thrill, but to honor the history and the souls tied to the place. What makes Moonville Tunnel unforgettable isn't just the accidents or legends, it's the tangible sense of history and humanity. Every cracked stone and shadowed arch speaks of people who lived, worked, and sometimes died here. The tunnel doesn't scream for attention. It quietly reminds visitors that behind every abandoned place is a story, real and unpolished by time. Walking through it, you understand why locals never forget and why anyone who steps inside feels something that is almost impossible to explain. Even when you leave the tunnel and the sunlight hits your face again, the memory lingers. The chill, the quiet, and the strange weight of history follow you back to the world above. Moonville Tunnel is more than a relic. It's a doorway into the past, a place where human life, loss, and memory converge, leaving visitors changed in ways they cannot fully articulate. 4. Helltown, Boston Township, Summit County. Most people drive past the quiet streets of Boston Township, Summit County, without realizing they are near one of Ohio's most infamous abandoned areas, Helltown. The name alone sparks curiosity, but the feeling hits you before you even know why. Empty houses, overgrown lawns, rusting cars, and silent streets give a strange sense that the town is still breathing, yet untouched by living residents. There's a weight in the air here, a lingering sense of sudden loss and lives interrupted, and it's impossible not to feel it. Helltown's story begins in the 1970s. The federal government purchased land in the area, intending to expand a national park. Families who had lived there for generations were forced to leave their homes. Some were paid, others struggled for years with eviction notices, and many abandoned their properties without fully understanding what would happen next. Slowly, the town emptied. Schools closed, churches were deserted, and the streets, once full of children's laughter, became silent. Over time, rumors spread about curses, hauntings, and unexplained occurrences, adding to the eerie reputation of the abandoned town. But beyond the myths, the reality is deeply human. A community uprooted, homes left to decay, and memories left behind. Local explorers who walk through Helltown today often describe a surreal mix of fascination and melancholy. One man who returned years after his grandparents were forced out said, "It was like stepping into a time capsule. Their house was still standing, windows broken, furniture covered in dust. I could almost see my family living there, hear them talking, and I felt a tight knot in my chest." He spent hours wandering the streets, documenting the houses, but what struck him most was not the decay, it was the silence, heavy and almost palpable, carrying the weight of history and displaced lives. Another visitor, a historian working to record abandoned towns, described a similar experience. She recalled walking through an empty schoolyard, the swings still moving slightly in the wind. She recalled walking through an empty schoolyard, the swings still moving slightly in the wind. It was heartbreaking, she said. These were places where families lived, children played, people built their lives, and suddenly it was gone. I felt sorrow for the people who had to leave and anger at the way it happened. The emotions she felt stayed with her for days, a reminder that Helltown's abandonment is not fiction, it is a real story of disruption and loss. What makes Helltown so haunting isn't the ghost stories, it's the human truth. Every boarded-up window, rusted mailbox, and cracked street sign tells the story of lives abruptly interrupted. Walking through the town, visitors can't help but imagine the conversations, the laughter, the heartbreak, and the struggle that happened here decades ago. Helltown doesn't need legends to scare you. Its silence speaks louder than any story ever could. Even after leaving, the memory lingers. The streets, the empty homes, and the quiet wind through the trees stay with you, reminding you of the impermanence of life and the traces we leave behind. Helltown is not just a town, it is a memory, a testament to families uprooted and the human stories that survive only in whispers and shadows. 5. Chippewa Lake Park, Medina County. The first time I saw the gates of Chippewa Lake Park, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. It wasn't the winter cold or the thick fog that hugged the ground. It was the weight of 100 forgotten summers, echoes of laughter swallowed by time. I had driven past the area countless times, hearing whispers of this abandoned amusement park in Medina County, Ohio, but nothing could prepare me for the silence that greeted me now. The Ferris wheel, once spinning high above joyful crowds, now leaned silently against the gray sky, rust eating its bones like a slow, relentless disease. Chippewa Lake Park opened in 1878, nearly a century ago. Families came from all over Ohio to ride its wooden roller coasters, glide along the lake in speedboats, or dance in the massive ballroom to the tunes of live bands. For decades, it was the heartbeat of summer, a place where memories were made, hearts raced with excitement, and children ran freely, their screams of joy mixing with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn. But by 1978, the laughter had faded. Bigger parks lured visitors away, and Chippewa Lake Park quietly closed its gates, leaving behind an eerie skeleton of what once was. Walking through the overgrown pathways, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's memories. Each rusted ride, each crumbling building seemed to whisper stories of the past. I remember pausing by the carousel, imagining the children who once rode the painted horses, their eyes wide with wonder. The swings in the distance swayed slightly in the wind, as if someone invisible had just let go. I felt a strange connection, like the park itself was aware of my presence, and it wanted to share its secrets. At the old Ferris wheel, I climbed carefully over the cracked pavement, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I reached the base, staring up at the towering structure that had once been the crown jewel of summer nights. I couldn't help but think about the people who had celebrated birthdays, first dates, and summer vacations here. Somewhere, their laughter still lingered, caught in the creaking metal and the wind whistling through broken windows. As I wandered further, the shadows deepened, and I realized the park was more than abandoned. It was alive with memories. I could almost see the ballroom full of dancers, spinning under twinkling lights, their smiles frozen in the past. I sat on a broken bench by the lake, staring at the still water, and felt an overwhelming mix of nostalgia and melancholy. It was a strange comfort, knowing that this place, though forgotten, had once been so full of life. By the time I left, the sun had dipped low, painting the rusted rides in a haunting orange glow. Chippewa Lake Park wasn't just an abandoned amusement park. It was a mirror of time itself, a place where human joy and sorrow lingered together, waiting for someone to remember. And I knew as I drove away that I would never forget the feeling of walking among ghosts of laughter, the echoes of 100 summers, whispering in the wind.
6. The Ridges, Athens Lunatic Asylum, Athens. I remember the first time I walked up the long, winding path toward the Ridges in Athens, Ohio. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the massive stone buildings loomed like forgotten giants. I'd heard stories about the asylum, about the cries that once echoed through these halls, the patients who lived here and the doctors who tried to cure them, but nothing could prepare me for the overwhelming sense of history pressing down on me. It wasn't just abandonment I felt, it was the weight of countless human lives, full of hope, fear, and desperation, trapped in time. The Ridges opened in 1874 as the Athens Lunatic Asylum, a place meant to help people with mental illnesses long before modern treatments existed. At its peak, the asylum housed over 2,000 patients, many of whom were sent here by their families with a mix of fear and hope. Some found relief, others suffered quietly, and a few never left. For over a century, the Ridges stood as both a place of care and a reflection of society's struggle to understand the human mind. By the late 1990s, the asylum closed its doors permanently, leaving behind empty corridors, cracked walls, and the echoes of voices that no longer spoke. Walking through the abandoned halls, I could almost see shadows moving just beyond my vision. The main building's tall windows were shattered, sunlight slicing through the darkness in jagged beams. I imagined patients sitting quietly in rooms lined with peeling wallpaper, nurses walking silently through the halls, and doctors consulting in dimly lit offices. Every step I took felt like walking on a thin line between past and present. I could feel their presence, a strange mixture of sadness and lingering energy. In the old treatment rooms, I noticed rusted metal beds and broken wheelchairs, reminders of lives lived and sometimes lost. I sat down for a moment on a decaying bench in the courtyard, listening to the wind whisper through overgrown trees. I thought about the families who sent their loved ones here, hoping for help, but often leaving them behind. The sorrow was palpable, and for a moment it felt like the walls themselves were trying to tell me their stories. As the sun dipped behind the hills, shadows stretched long across the abandoned grounds, and I realized the Ridges wasn't just a place of tragedy, it was a testament to human struggle, endurance, and forgotten history. Each cracked stone, each silent hallway carried stories that deserved to be remembered. Leaving the asylum, I felt both heavy and humbled, knowing I had walked through the remnants of lives that once carried so much hope, fear, and humanity. The Ridges might be abandoned now, but it is alive with memory, with echoes that reach anyone willing to see beyond the silence. And as I drove away, I knew that this place would stay with me forever, a haunting reminder of the thin line between care and neglect, between life and the memories that outlast it.
7. Squire's Castle, North Chagrin Reservation. The first time I saw Squire's Castle, I felt like I had stepped into a storybook, but a storybook that had been abandoned and forgotten. The tall stone walls rose from the forest like a monument to some long-lost dream, and the air around it carried a strange mix of peace and unease. Even from a distance, the castle seemed alive, as if it were silently watching anyone who dared to approach. I had heard whispers from locals about strange sounds at night, footsteps in empty halls, and a presence that never left. But standing there, I realized this place was more than just rumors. It was a window into someone's ambitions, hopes, and the passage of time. Squire's Castle was built in the 1890s by Fergus B. Squire, a wealthy executive with the Standard Oil Company. He envisioned it as a hunting lodge for friends and family, a place of elegance amidst the woods. But the castle was never completed as he intended. The interior was mostly empty, with only the walls and fireplaces standing as proof of the grand plans that had faded over time. Despite never being finished, the structure became a favorite for local explorers and families visiting North Chagrin Reservation, standing as a mysterious landmark in the forest. As I walked through the overgrown paths leading to the castle, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet echoed in the quiet woods. I imagined Squire walking these same grounds, envisioning grand parties, hunting trips, and laughter filling the halls. But as I entered through the archway, I felt the emptiness pressing down on me. The fireplaces were blackened with age, and the windows framed only the green of encroaching forest. I sat for a moment on the stone steps, picturing the guests who never arrived, the echoes of conversations that never happened. Exploring deeper, I felt a strange connection to the people who had touched this place, even if briefly. The castle was more than stone and mortar. It was a testament to dreams interrupted, to ambition frozen in time. I could almost hear whispers, the wind weaving through cracks in the walls, carrying faint traces of the past. I imagined what it must have felt like for Squire to stand here, proud yet unfulfilled, and for visitors to wander the halls in awe of what could have been. As the sun began to set, the shadows of the trees stretched across the castle walls, giving it an almost haunting beauty. Squire's castle wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a story of human ambition, dreams that linger longer than the people who hold them, and the quiet way nature reclaims what we leave behind. Walking away, I felt a mix of melancholy and wonder, knowing that the castle, though empty, held a life of its own, whispering stories to anyone patient enough to listen.
8. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Works, Mahoning Valley. The first time I stood at the gates of the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Works, I felt like I had walked into a graveyard for industry. The massive steel structures loomed above me, rusted and silent, as if the machines themselves had sighed and given up long ago. I had heard the stories of this place, the factories that once roared with life, the men who worked here for decades, and the sudden collapse that left families without livelihoods. But seeing it with my own eyes made everything feel painfully real. The air smelled of rust and ash, and the wind carried the ghost of hammers striking steel. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Works was once the heart of Mahoning Valley, a powerhouse of steel production that employed thousands. Founded in the early 1900s, the factory brought hope to countless families, offering stable jobs, pride, and a sense of community. The clanging of machines, the smell of molten metal, and the chatter of workers filled the air every day. Generations of families depended on this steel, shaping not just the city, but the lives of everyone who lived there. But by the 1970s and 80s, the steel industry began to collapse. Factories closed almost overnight. Families who had built their lives around the hum of machines found themselves in silence. The tube works shut its doors, leaving behind vast, decaying structures and a haunting emptiness. Walking through the sprawling complex today, I could almost hear echoes of footsteps in the empty hallways, the shouts of foremen over the roar of furnaces, and the laughter of workers on break. I remember stepping inside one of the old assembly halls, the floor littered with rusted metal and broken tools. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, the lives, struggles, and resilience of people who had poured sweat and blood into this place. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined a young man in the 1950s, his hands blackened with soot, pride in his eyes as he worked to feed his family. The factory wasn't just steel, it was hope, ambition, and the very pulse of a community. As I walked among the rusted beams and silent furnaces, I realized the site wasn't just abandoned, it was a monument to human endurance and sudden loss. It held stories of triumph and despair, of families thriving and then struggling to survive after the doors closed. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the whispers of the past, and I felt an eerie connection to the people who once called this place their life. Leaving the tube works that day, the sun setting behind the skeletal steel structures, I felt a mix of sorrow and respect. This wasn't just an abandoned factory, it was a living memory of an era, a testament to the rise and fall of industry and the lives that shaped it. And even in decay, it spoke volumes, reminding anyone who dared to listen that history isn't just written, it's felt.
9. Underground lagering cellars over the Rhine, Cincinnati. The first time I descended into the underground lagering cellars in Over the Rhine, Cincinnati, I felt like I was stepping into a hidden world frozen in time. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of earth and old stone. My footsteps echoed off the walls, and every sound seemed amplified, as if the tunnels themselves were listening. I had read about these cellars, the massive underground caves where brewers once stored beer for months, keeping it cold before modern refrigeration. But standing there, it felt less like history and more like entering someone else's secret. The cellars were built in the mid-1800s by German immigrants who settled in Cincinnati, creating what would become one of the largest beer-producing cities in the United States. These tunnels stretched for miles beneath the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood, carved into the limestone bedrock, and they were critical for lagering beer. Before refrigeration, brewers relied on the naturally cool temperatures of these cellars to age their beer. The cellars weren't just practical, they were a testament to the ingenuity and hard work of the immigrants who built a community, a culture, and a livelihood beneath the bustling streets above. Walking through the dark corridors, I could almost imagine the brewers rolling barrels of beer through these tunnels, the sound of wooden wheels scraping the stone floor, the laughter and chatter of workers carrying out their daily tasks. Every nook and cranny held a story. I found an old wooden support beam leaning precariously, a reminder of the hundreds of years that had passed, and I wondered how many hands had touched it, how many lives had intersected in these silent spaces. As I ventured further, the darkness seemed to thicken. I ran my fingers along the cold, rough walls, thinking about the people who had worked tirelessly here. They were not just laborers, they were pioneers, building a city, a culture, and a reputation for excellence in brewing that Cincinnati would carry for generations. The tunnels, abandoned for decades, were now haunted by echoes of their sweat, determination, and dreams. I could feel it in the air, a strange connection that was almost tangible, as if the cellar itself remembered the bustling life above. I paused in a wide chamber where the ceilings arched high overhead. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the distant drip of water. I imagined someone stumbling through here at night, hearing the creaks and groans of the ancient stones, feeling the presence of history pressing close. It was eerie, yes, but also beautiful. These underground cellars were not just abandoned, they were living memory, a bridge to the past that carried both pride and melancholy. Leaving the cellars, I felt a mix of awe and quiet reverence. The streets above seemed ordinary, bustling with life, but below the surface lay a hidden world that shaped the city in ways most people would never see. The underground lagering cellars weren't just tunnels, they were a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the echoes of a community that thrived in silence. And as I walked back into the daylight, I knew that the ghosts of those brewers, their dreams and struggles, would stay with me forever. 10. The Bisman Building, Mansfield. The first time I stepped inside the Bisman Building in Mansfield, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease. The front doors hung crooked on their hinges, groaning as I pushed them open, and the smell of dust and decay hit me like a wall. Sunlight streamed in through shattered windows, painting the empty hallways with streaks of gold and shadow. I had read stories about this place, the offices that were once full of business, the workers who hustled through every corridor. But standing there, it all felt hauntingly quiet. It was like time had stopped, leaving behind only echoes and memories. The Bisman Building was built in the early 20th century as a bustling commercial hub. For decades, it hosted offices, businesses, and professionals who kept Mansfield's economy alive. People came here every day, dressed in suits, carrying briefcases, and exchanging greetings in hallways that are now silent. Over the years, the building saw expansions, renovations, and even celebrations for milestones, standing as a symbol of ambition and enterprise in the city. But eventually, businesses left, the building fell into disuse, and slowly it was abandoned. The walls that once echoed with chatter now only echoed with my own footsteps. Walking deeper into the building, I could almost see the offices full of life, the clerks typing furiously, the managers hurrying between rooms, the scent of ink and paper filling the air. I ran my fingers over a dusty ledge and imagined the hands that had touched it years ago, the laughter, the small arguments, and the quiet moments of triumph when a deal was closed. It was easy to forget that behind every abandoned wall were real lives, hopes and dreams, frozen in time but never truly gone. In one corner, I found a shattered filing cabinet, papers strewn across the floor like the remnants of forgotten stories. I picked one up, feeling the brittle texture of old documents, and thought about the people who walked these halls, the routines they followed, and the lives that intertwined with this building. The silence around me made every creak of the floorboards magnified, and I couldn't help but shiver as I imagined the building as it once was, full of energy, ambition, and human connection. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the empty rooms, I realized the Bisman building was more than abandoned. It was a monument to human effort and the passage of time. Every wall, every staircase, and every broken window carried the stories of those who had built their lives within its walls. Leaving that day, I felt a strange respect for this forgotten place, knowing that even in its decay, the Bisman building held the echoes of countless dreams, ambitions, and memories.